That's okay, she's fine. Half time, she stays at home. Well, we did, take the deed up and then she's moving.
Yes.
I, well, you're close to one.
Oh, is it? Yeah, sure.
Normally, yeah, like the user doesn't exist.
Okay.
That means something's wrong.
You have been put in, okay. Yeah, these
That's
are-
the other issue. If you've got messages where it says, like that.
Yes.
I think those are.
Gotcha.
Oh, if you want to just put that out, you'll have to. Most of them are. Yeah, I just mark yes.
I know it's on the big
You can help. Oh, that's a problem. She would, because she has an active account. You just stuff.
Yeah.
Excel file, something. It's in the other way.
Yeah, I'll just look, if you don't have to use the next couple days. I'll leave it at that.
Yep.
There is, thank you for understanding. I will.
There is?
Yeah, there is. It's got any copies of
We've got a few minutes left for a couple board members to find parking places, but they've veered around the way, so give them a few and
if there is one.
please start.
Yeah.
Walking in on this like, should I go get the rest of the signs?
I haven't raised my age
For
level.
the board members?
Yeah, I was
Don't worry
doing,
about it, I'll get it.
so I've been doing yoga for a while, but I did yoga class with the instructor, and there was one who was unsure, like, if my ankle was supposed to turn this way. And I never did it, and then at night when I was trying to like stretch out the kink, I made it worse.
I know Jeff was.
How long do you have to
Excuse
do
me.
it?
Like Jeff usually moves, but
I don't know, I have an MRI on Wednesday.
Brian, I don't think.
That's okay.
We'll share.
Yeah, that's good.
They share, it takes them a few
You're.
By the township, I think there's no, I mean, not the township, the townhouse.
Yeah.
We can definitely get another chair.
They don't fight.
He doesn't respond.
100 instead of 120, because we're 100.
Anyway, I had to use it, the inaugural meeting of the Granville Board of Education President gavel. Good evening, welcome to the Granville Education, Granville School District Board of Education meeting. Please join me for the pledge of allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Wilson. Dr. Foreman. Here. Mr. Miller.
Here.
Ms. Deeds. Here. Ms. Shaw. Here.
Can I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda, including the addendum 10.04? Second. Thank you. Take the roll, please.
Ms. Deeds. Aye. Ms. Shaw. Aye. Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Dr. Foreman.
Aye. Conversations?
Good evening. Our first commendation for the board is the Leaders for Learning Award. So Licking County Foundation has an award that they grant to each school district to identify a leader of learning. This is an award that goes to one teacher that exemplifies the best in the profession. So this year's recipient is Mr. Matthew Engler. Matt, come on up. I'm going to read some really nice things about him while I stand in his shadow. Mr. Engler is a highly reflective teacher who works diligently to improve his craft each year. He is extremely student-focused and eager to try new methods to help students learn the way that it works best for them. Mr. Engler is determined to make learning accessible at the student level while pushing them with high expectations. Finding ways to engage his middle school students in the subject of math is really important to him. Furthermore, Matt's ability to build relationships with students is a true strength. He discovers ways to connect the most difficult concepts to teach to his students. Mr. Engler never gives up and communicates effectively with families, students, his colleagues, and his administrators. Matt applies the same determination to opportunities in leadership. He has been our special education department team leader for several years now, and he can be counted on to clearly communicate information to his team in a timely and efficient manner. Mr. Engler is quick to assist with building-wide and district initiatives, and his quiet, calm, imposing demeanor is approachable by students and staff alike. So congratulations, Mr. Engler. Oh yeah, we need to do a picture, Brian. Come on back.
So close.
Anybody got a step stool? This is going to be awkward.
Probably stand on a chair.
Yeah, I know. Many of you have probably heard, but we were awarded the National Blue Ribbon Award that Mr. Durst went to DC 2 weeks ago to accept the award on behalf of Granville High School. I'd like to introduce our high school principal, Mr. Matt Durst, to come to the podium, describe his experience, and share the award for the Blue Ribbon status. Yeah.
As Jeff mentioned, I was honored to travel to Washington, D.C. November 4th and 5th. I was able to bring GHS English teacher Edie Smith with me to help receive the award on behalf of the high school. But I mean, truly, and this is something that we want to be very clear about, this is a community award. This is a school district award. I was thinking earlier, seeing Amy Mullins and Keith Mullins sitting side by side, giving us an elementary to high school span. The kids come into the high school set up with a foundation that undoubtedly happens K-8 that we can then build on. So this is truly a district award in that sense. I was able to attend a nice award ceremony with some PD offerings that were available and kind of a menu selection that Evie and I were both able to attend on Thursday and then on Friday. This, to me, was kind of those once-in-a-lifetime opportunities to go and to be recognized for the work that so many of our students and our staff and our community do. It was a big honor for us.
So, we were selected as one of 325 high schools across the country for this award. This is actually the third time Granville High School has been recognized as a National Blue Ribbon High School. So, congratulations, Mr. Durst. This will hang proudly at GHS, but thank you for coming and sharing your experiences, and congratulations to you. Picture too. Again, like, do we really, anyone else that's above, Glenn, would you like to?
I'm smiling from ear to ear.
I know, right?
Yeah, let's take these off.
Excellent.
Staff reports. First, we'll start with the food services and nutritional standards.
Tanya Sherburne and Chef John.
So Jonathan Harbaugh is here with me. He is from ABI Fresh Foods, and he subcontract our food service program with ABI. And he is our chef and oversees the program. And tonight we are going to talk a little about our operation from last year and some of the hardships and challenges that we had with COVID, and then also how we're doing so far this year. And then we're also going to talk about our nutritional standards and how those are determined and how we follow the guidelines of selecting what food that we do serve our students. So I will turn it over to John, and we will kind of tag team this a little bit.
So this school year, we're able to do the SSL program, which allows all students, regardless of free and reduced status, to eat a full reimbursable meal, which includes the entree, fruit, veggie, and a milk. This does not apply to any extras or a la carte items. This year, we were able to return hot meals back to the elementary and intermediate school. Last year, we had to do cold box lunches just with restrictions and COVID safety. With the return of hot meals, meal counts have greatly increased.
As you can imagine.
Yes. This is a graph of the last 3 years. Pre-COVID is in green. Last year is in the teal, and blue is this year. The first set of bars is for a la carte sales. I ended up doing a meal equivalency for those. Of course, pre-COVID was the greatest we had with a la carte. We weren't necessarily meal driven as we are now to ensure that everyone gets that free meal. And of course, this year too, we've had to reduce our a la cartes due to staffing. Our ACES place isn't open, and there's no a la carte at the intermediate school at all. The other set of bars is the meals. Pre-COVID, oh, by the way, these are the first 57 in-school service days for each year. Pre-COVID, we had 32,000. This year, we're almost at 72,000. So a very large increase this year. Some continued COVID challenges. One of the greatest challenges we've had is food supplies, anywhere from dry pasta to beverages. And basically, nothing has been untouched. People ask, what are we having this bag? And I'm like, I couldn't tell you. With that, non-food supplies as well, we've had to do foam trays at the intermediate and elementary school. Those have been a challenge to get in, as well as just any kind of paper or plastic utensils. On top of vast increase in cost of food and supplies, because foam trays are in high demand across the country, suppliers have also raised their prices, realizing that they can. Another example is pre-COVID, a case of chicken was only $40. Now it's close to $90. Another continued challenge has been the staffing and impact on operations with that. Again, we haven't been able to open the ACES place. We went from a staff of 17 down to 10, on top of doing almost 72,000 meals.
So we are looking for volunteers, if anyone would like to come in and help serve some lunches at the different buildings, we would be glad to take some assistance.
Compliance with nutritional standards, board policy EFF, food sales standards. Ways that we stay compliant with that is our ABI dietitian just focuses on our K through 12 accounts. That's her one and only focus. She doesn't deal with colleges or businesses. All of our lunch cycle menus are compliant and meet American Dietary Guidelines. The USDA compliance tool is used for lunch and completed annually for just to ensure compliance, and every single year, and any new beverages or a la carte items are run through the Smart Snack calculator, just to make sure that we meet guidelines with that as well. Above the USDA standards, we're still cooking from scratch when possible. Batch cooking to ensure higher quality of food, meaning that we're not cooking everything by 9 o'clock. We're doing things as needed just to ensure that they're a higher quality of food. Local vendors are still being used, and fresh food utilized in menus, meaning that none of the vegetables are canned, and we try to use fresh everything we do. Any questions?
What would you say is, can you, I don't know where to speak. What do you think is the favorite meal?
Pizza. Pizza trumps all. Yes.
Do you have more food waste this year, or less, or about the same?
Less than, well,
Pre-COVID?
pre-COVID, more. Less than what was last year, if you, being that we're doing so many more meals, it's more, but to have a ratio less, for the main fact that at the elementary and intermediate schools, instead of the pre-bagged raw veggies that we were forced to give every single student in those boxes to make sure they had that meal, they now have the option to take a hot vegetable and one of the bagged fruits. So now I don't see half of that broccoli going into the trash. It's kids that want that broccoli.
That's good. Thank you.
John, are we able to still partner with the garden in the back and get some of the vegetables?
Absolutely. In fact, we just
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we partner with Mr. Redding, or Jim Redding, and he's actually still bringing us in daily chicken eggs, which, we can't keep them out there. They go on all of our salads. We've also utilized tons and tons of banana peppers from him, and beets, Swiss chard, trying to think what else he brought. All kinds of peppers still.
Thank you. Excellent.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Going from 17 people to 10 people serving more lunches has got to be a challenge.
It is.
Is that kind of sustainable, or do we need to recruit more, or how are we doing from that staffing and cost perspective and so forth? Is that going to manage itself?
It's managing now for the main fact that at the elementary and intermediate schools, because lunches are free and there's no a la carte, there's no need for cashiers. And that would have been 4 positions right there. It's hitting hardest at the high school because we had to close certain stations and on top of ACES place. So it is and it isn't at the same time.
You were talking a little about what ABI does.
Recruiting staff, we do have active job seekers that go to job training sites. They are looking through, of course, online. They go to job fairs. But right now, a lot of people can choose where they work. So it's been a constant issue.
Do we have kind of an overall sense of how the economics of our food services program are going to work? I mean, with costs going more than double for some ingredients and things like that, but personnel costs potentially going up per person, but down in numbers and a lot of support. There's a lot of balls in the air there. What's kind of the bottom line about how this is all going to work out for the year, or what's your forecast?
We are forecasting to still make a profit, well above the break-even mark for us. For the main fact that the federal reimbursement rate for a meal has also increased. So it went from, I don't remember hard numbers, $3.40 something to $4.20 or something like that. So on top of much more meals, we're getting a higher reimbursement.
And that's for the school year, is that right? It's been confirmed?
That's correct.
Yes.
Wow, thank you very much for staying on top of it. It's just one of those crazy things. I mean, there's a lot of restaurants that aren't open every day of the week, right? But we don't really have that option, right? We have a lot of kids that depend on it, so we appreciate all you do every day. And it's really great to see our local food options through our own garden working out as well, because we have more control of that, and it just feels good and healthy that way. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have our treasurer, Brittany, who is going to give the 5-year forecast.
The 5-year forecast, just for a reminder for everybody, is filed twice a year in November, and then we do an update again in May. And this is just a forecast. It is largely based on trend data and kind of what we know at the time. It is not a budget, it's not a spending plan, anything like that. It's really just a long-term tool that we use for planning purposes. Of course, the data and assumptions that we put into the forecast are subject to change at a moment's notice. So although we only formally adopt this and file it with the state twice a year, we do make changes and updates on an ongoing basis that we use internally throughout the year. So first, we always start with this graph. It's a forecast summary, and it compares in each year our total revenue to our total expenditures. So the total revenue is represented by the black bars, and total expenditures represented by the gray bars. And then the 2 lines that I have here, the blue one is the cash balance, assuming the income tax levy is renewed. And then the orange line is the cash balance in each year if that levy is not renewed. So we are in a strong financial position right now with a growing cash balance each year throughout the forecast period, assuming that that levy is renewed. But you can see the difference between those 2 lines is significant. And that's where, if that levy is not renewed, our cash balance begins to diminish quickly once we get out to 2026. And then I forgot to mention the top bars here, those orange sections, in those last 3 years. That represents the income tax portion that would fall off of the revenue, the total revenue in each year if the levy is not renewed. So jumping into our revenue overview, on the left side here, this is a breakdown of our total sources in 21 compared to 26. So the interesting thing to note here is the gray section that increases from about 16.6% up to over 18%. So what that means is the income tax is growing at a rate higher than the other sources of revenue. So that over time is going to become a larger portion of our total revenue. That's why its passage, the renewal, is essential to maintain our cash position. Then the graph on the right, these bars each represent total revenue in each of those years. So as the income tax was passed and phased in from 19 to 21, those bars grow significantly. But then going out to 26, really it's pretty flat. That means there's minimal growth in our revenue in each of those years. So that's important to keep in mind when we flip to the expenditure side and do a comparison of revenue growth compared to expenditure growth.
Brittany, thinking about income tax as a percentage of the overall local revenue that we generate, I would guess it's increasing in that sense because property tax doesn't increase over time.
Correct.
Property tax is flat in dollar sense.
Right.
In which is why you have a levy cycle and you have to continue to go back.
Correct.
Thinking about it in a longer term perspective, you wouldn't expect that to continue to increase. It would always stay somewhere in this 15 to 20% range.
The income tax
Right,
percentage.
because income
Yeah,
tax
because
revenues are going to continue at a rate of inflation, roughly.
Right. And then at some point, we would eventually need to pass a property tax revenue, or property tax levy, potentially more than 5 years down the road. But at that point, once that's phased in, then that kind of balances the income tax again.
Right.
So the income tax will continue to grow until we pass another property tax. So it's not going to become 50% of our revenue, but it will probably be around 15 to 20%.
Again, it'll increase naturally every year with the rate of inflation of wages and so forth, whereas property tax will increase in lumps.
Yes.
Every however many years we need to pass a
Right.
property tax incremental levy every whatever years.
Correct. Yep.
And that's also assuming state funding is flat.
Yes. Yes. So
And that was kind of our intent. Our intent with the income tax was to have it be between 15 and 20% of our
yes,
revenue.
to have diversification of our revenue streams for that exact reason. Yep, that's a great point. So we've kind of just talked about the three main sources. So we have property tax revenue. As Thomas mentioned, we do not see growth in that revenue stream because as property values go up due to update and reappraisal, which happens every 3 years, the tax rates are adjusted down. So we don't continue to see additional revenue as those values increase. The only increase that we see is as values go up due to new construction or on the inside millage portion, which is a very small portion. It's just 2.45 mils for the general operating fund. So yes, any significant increase in property tax revenue would be a new levy that would come in like one lump sum. And again, that's, hopefully several years down the road. For the income tax is performing well. Despite COVID, the phase-in has happened as we expected. It's actually come in higher than we initially expected. And the forecast assumes a 2% increase. So potentially with inflation being higher than that right now, the forecast could actually be conservative as far as our revenue assumptions go for the income tax. We talked about it becoming over 18% of our total revenue. And then state funding. So that's our final source that I wanted to talk about. And spend a little bit of time just because we have the new funding formula. So I really went into depth at the August meeting, going into the details of how the formula works. But just to apply some of our data to that and give you an overview of how it works, it's an input-based method. So first we calculate base cost, and there's a personnel allocation and a non-personnel allocation, and that's converted to a per pupil amount. So the per pupil amount that each district receives is around the same number, but it is slightly different from district to district just based on your enrollment and the different grade bands, the size of district, the number of buildings you operate. There's various components that go into that. So our per pupil base cost is a $7,152. So then after calculating the base cost per pupil, the formula applies local capacity. So how much is the state going to fund versus how much do we have to fund locally? And that is where we come up with this pie here that shows the state is going to fund $1,182 of the $7,152. The other thing to keep in mind is the formula is saying our base cost is $7,152, but our actual expenditure per pupil is around $12,000. So the difference between the $12,000 and $7,000, we're already funding locally. So really, we're funding about $11,000 of the total $12,000 locally, and the state's funding the other $1,000.
Okay, so to kind of restate that, that says basically across the state of Ohio, the state of Ohio says they're going to pay $7,000 per pupil. Roughly, maybe some districts is 7, some is 7,500 or something like that in that range. That's how much the state of Ohio thinks their share is, or how much they're going to pay for public education.
Right.
If you're a wealthy district, that gets adjusted, right, based on your property value and income, and it just happens to get adjusted so that Granville only gets $1,000 instead of the $7,000. Now, there are probably no districts in the state of Ohio that educate for $7,000. I imagine they're all in the $9,000 to $18,000, I don't know, or something like that. Is that about right?
Right, yep.
And Granville falls right in the middle there at $12,000.
Yep.
So, okay.
Yep, so even those districts that are receiving 100% of what the base cost is calculating, they're still funding some locally to meet their total expenditures.
Okay.
So then 2 more components of the formula to come up with our total funding. So what we just talked about on the previous slide is represented by the blue bar here. That's our calculated funding. Well, then the formula says, okay, compare your calculated funding to what you received in fiscal year 2020. And you will receive no less than what you received in 2020. So to get us to that level, we have the orange bar, which is our guaranteed funding. So that is saying that to get to that 2020 level, we have guaranteed funding on top of what's being calculated. There are other components outside of the guarantee, so there's a transportation component that's then added on top of this, which is what's actually going to give us more money than what we received last year. So we are not only being kept full where we were in previous years, but we'll receive additional funding because of an additional transportation component. Granted, it is on the guarantee, but that is part of the formula right now. The formula is for 2 years, just like every biennium budget. So we hope that it continues and stays in there and is part of the funding formula. But again, it's always subject to the legislature at that time. Then the final piece of the state funding puzzle is what's happening on the expenditure side. So we're receiving revenue only for those students who we're educating. In the past, we would receive revenue for all students and then pay tuition expense for those students who are open enrolled, attending community schools, and on Autism or Peterson Scholarship. So on the right here, I try to do a summary that shows what's the net impact to cash, because we're going to receive less revenue, about $227,000, but we're also paying out less in expense, about $579,000. So that's a positive impact on cash just in itself of $352,000. So at the end of the day, the formula is beneficial to Granville for those reasons, for the fact that we have the guarantee, we have this additional transportation component, and then also the fact that we're no longer having to do the pass-through payments for tuition expenses.
So what's in the forecast going forward in the formula beyond 2 years, or in the revenue beyond 2 years?
Basically, what we're assuming is that this formula stays in place to some extent. We have enrollment assumptions, which I'll show you on the next slide, which goes into it. And then each year, our assumptions for valuation and income are adjusted up. But basically, we're assuming that the forecast, or the formula stays in place.
We've almost always had a guarantee, right?
Yep, there's always really been a guarantee ever since I've been around, which is longer than you guys think probably, but so it is unlikely that the bottom would just completely fall out and we would be responsible for this entire orange portion. Like, that's not, I wouldn't be super concerned about that. So, yeah.
But is my expectation, I mean, this new formula is a big deal because it's actually a working thing that you can forecast from, which has not been the case for a long time.
Right.
But I would expect that there's a desire to make the formula functional across the board. So probably either through reduction of the guarantee or tweaks in the formula, we'll hopefully see both guarantees and caps go away and be replaced by true formula, which is effective.
Right.
But making that transition is important so school districts aren't held too harmless in that process and don't have too much of an issue with it. So basically the formula said the state's responsibility is $7,000 per pupil, if I think of it that way,
right.
Unless you're a wealthy district like Granville, in which case it's $1,000 in our case, $1,200. These numbers all added together, including the guarantee, probably puts us more back to around $2,000 per student.
Right.
For what the state is going to fund,
right.
And the remainder of the $10,000 roughly out of the $12,000 is going to be local revenue. So it really is, would you say there's not a significant difference in how much this impacts us? It's not enormous.
Right, yeah, and that's what we talked about really back in August, okay, it's not going to be a significant difference.
Right.
So for a district like us, we weren't gonna see a significant swing one way or the other. Because we were on the formula before, I think is part of it. But the reason why we're so much on the guarantee, as you mentioned, was tweaks in the formula, right? So tweaks in the formula is what's landed us on the guarantee. As the formula was tweaked throughout the legislative process. So we're hoping that some of those tweaks go the other way, for the next revision of the budget so that we're not so reliant on that guarantee.
I think that's a good assumption, but I wouldn't ever assume that we'll get more money from the state.
No.
No matter how many tweaks and guarantees and caps and budgets there are and things like that, I think the forecast for Granville should be, we're not going to get a whole lot more per pupil going forward than we have in the past.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. When you look at just this line item forecast by itself, very flat.
Yeah.
So I mentioned enrollment is a component to this formula. So for it to impact our funding significantly, we would have to see significant increase in enrollment, which we're not anticipating, at least at this time. What our projections are based on is really historical trend pre-COVID, because this is kind of hard to see on the screen, but this year that I'm pointing to is last year, where pretty much every district across the state saw a decrease in their enrollment last year, just mostly with homeschooling. So we took our trend prior to COVID. It's a little less than 1%, so that's what we're expecting or projecting for enrollment going forward. So it's not likely that we're going to see a significant increase on the revenue side due to enrollment, but this is going to drive on the expenditure side in terms of staffing and potentially building capacity at some point. So I'll talk about that in a second as well. So the expenditure overview, then this is the slide that I said, okay, remember kind of our trend on the revenue side where it was very flat going forward. That's not the case on the expense side. So what that indicates is that our expenses are growing at a faster rate than our revenue. So let me jump back to on the graph on the left here. So this, similar to the revenue, shows the breakdown of the expenditure categories. The blue and orange represent salary and benefits, so that's staffing, being almost 80% of total expenses. And that remains pretty constant over the life of the forecast. The only thing is benefits is growing at a faster rate than the other expenditure categories, so that is growing a little bit in terms of the total percentage. 2020 is an outlier here in terms of total expenditures. That's the athletic complex transfer. So those expenses were paid out of a separate fund, but we did have to record the portion that we transferred for that project, and that hit the books in 2020. And then, as I said, we do see growth for the remainder of the forecast, and it's a little bit higher than our historical trend, which is mostly due to our assumptions on the benefits side that I will talk about on the next slide here. So our assumptions for our three main expenditure categories. For salaries, we have included steps and then a 2% increase on the base. And then this is where enrollment comes in, is enrollment growth and needing additional teaching positions. So just for forecasting purposes, we have an additional teaching position built in for 23 and 25. But each year we evaluate grade bands, whether we can move staff internally before we just go ahead and add a position. So like this year, I believe, was one of our largest kindergarten classes. And so we always first see, okay, well, we know that that kindergarten class is now going to move up to first grade next year, so we can probably just allocate one of those teachers up each grade band without having to add a new teacher. So we do those kinds of adjustments first, but we do have built in those two additional positions if needed. And then we are always looking at space, physical space in the classrooms, keeping an eye on that and planning and getting some other spaces ready for additional instructional space as needed as well, so that we have that ready to go. For benefits, we have negotiated a 5% increase in our medical insurance premiums, which is the largest portion of the benefit line item, is the medical insurance. So we have that locked in for 2022, but then 23 forward, we don't know that yet. So we have a 15% rate cap for 23, and then we have 10% assumed going forward. So that's where I mentioned we're seeing significant growth. That line item is growing at a faster rate than the other expense line items. But it's also kind of built to be worst case scenario. So that 15% likely will not stick. We'll negotiate that down. We'll get different bids from different carriers when we get closer to that time. Of course, also benefits increase as we add additional staff as well, so that's also built in. And then the last one is purchase service. So this includes a lot of different things. It has the tuition expense that I mentioned for the community school open enrollment and scholarships. So this line item is actually going down this year because we don't have those items showing up as an expense on our books. Those students are being funded directly. But it also includes things like utilities, which are going up. So there is some offset there for purchase service.
Brittany, quickly back to the enrollment. You said this is one of our largest kindergarten classes. Do we have a sense for what's coming after this, and whether it was that birth rate data that we could relate to 5 years ago, or do we have a trend of understanding there?
That's what we use here. So we use birth data for the next 4 years, and then when you get out to the last year, they're not born yet. So you have to just make some assumptions there. But yes, that is, we do look at the birth data, and then there's also an adjustment for like what the kindergarten class always looks like compared to what those live birth raw numbers are, and then we take that into account.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so wrapping up, and just wanted to bring us back to this overview again. We are in a strong financial position. And that is due to really, I didn't mention this earlier, but the utilization of federal funds. So over the last year and a half, we've really been able to use every dollar that's been allocated, not only to us, but partnering with the village and the township to utilize some of their dollars as well. That has certainly helped. We've managed our operating funds effectively. You know, we're bringing in additional revenue beyond what we're spending in each year. We're not just increasing our expenses because we have the revenue there. So we're being, you know, financially responsible. And then, again, with the levy renewal and looking at the blue line here, we're in a strong position and would likely not need new money for at least 5 years beyond that renewal. So we would be beyond the life of this forecast before we would need to look at a new property tax. Without the levy renewal, though, looking at the orange line, the cash balance diminishes quickly, and we're quickly, if you compare just the gray to the black in 2026, we're quickly outpacing our revenue with what we're spending. So the levy renewal is essential, and we look to have the levy renewal on the ballot next fall. Any additional comments, questions? Jeff, anything that I missed or you want to add?
No, I would just add that the levy renewal was by design. It was a concept that was talked about to diversify our revenue streams, which we've accomplished, but also proof of concept for the community to say, okay, we'll come back in 5 years. This is a new way of collecting revenue. We're going to come back and show you that we've been strong fiscal managers of those taxpayer funds, and then ask for renewal. And so we're tracking that same, you know, way of thinking through this process. So it's coming to fruition the way that we had expected.
And this is how all districts throughout the state have to manage their funds. They have to keep coming back to taxpayers to ask, to prove how they're using the money through all these forecasts and the updates you give us, and then continue to ask for money. It's not as if we'll ever have one huge pot of money that we can just...
Right, and it's very common to see the influx of revenue, so where you'll have a really large increase in revenue, and then you live off that balance for a while, and then you have to ask for new money again, and then you go through that cycle. So yes, that is how, especially districts that are largely property tax funded, it's a cyclical process and having to continuously go back and ask for more. So what we're trying to do with the income tax is hopefully put more time between the property tax levies that we may have to ask for in the future. So instead of, say, I'm just throwing numbers out there, instead of every 5 years, maybe we can stretch it to every 7, having to come back. So just extending that cycle as much as possible.
I guess I'd just kind of like to point out that this is a 5-year forecast in the context of everything seems to change every few months, right? And if you'd have looked at this forecast a year ago, or if you thought about the economic position of our district or our country a year ago, like, there's just like a lot of balls in the air, right? So I think this is really good, and I think it reinforces like this is kind of what we intended to happen. It looks like things are moving in the right direction. You know, state funding is not drastically different, right, with the new formula, which is good. The federal funds have helped us out a lot, right, which is the case for some school districts, but definitely not others, right? And we've done the most to maximize our utilization of that, to extend this levy cycle as long as we can, right? And so it looks like we've pushed out the levy cycle to beyond this forecast cycle, but we really need to renew the income tax and talk as a community about the way that continues to be an important part of our revenue source, so we can have this sustainable model moving forward. So, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if our forecast in 6 months looks different than this for some reason, right?
So we
A
can
year from
guarantee
now,
it will
for sure,
look different,
right?
for sure, right? It's always changing, yeah.
We're doing our best with this, and I think this is the right plan and seems to match with my sense of what should be happening, but, you know, inflation, who knows, right? On our costs, you know, inflation on our income tax or changes in the property tax or the state formula are always risks that are out there, but it feels like it's pretty much what we would have expected.
Right. Yep, and as any of those, I mean, obviously this is always can always change a little bit here and there, but as significant things happen, you know, we're always plugging in new assumptions and looking at this on a monthly basis. So, yeah, the important thing is we know it's going to change, but just keeping the communication with the board and the community and making sure everybody knows why and where it's coming from, so we all are on the same page.
And there are often a lot of questions that come up relative to this when people see them, and I would encourage them to call you.
I would as well, yes.
Brittany's got an open door and an open phone, so please reach out to anyone, Brittany especially, who really understands this, if there's any questions on anyone's part.
And I will, for the folks in the room or anybody online, I'll have the full forecast notes uploaded on our website tomorrow, in case you have any interest.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
I will give a brief school update. I'll stand here, I don't have a normal presentation. Just want to give you a little bit of a status report. We currently have 13 total active cases in our student population, 2 staff members who are COVID positive. Our current number distribution, we have 3 cases at the elementary, 7 at the intermediate school, and I'll reference that again here in a minute. 2 at the middle school and 1 at the high school. Our current mask status is we are strongly recommending K through 12 that students remain masked. However, it is mask optional, so parents do have the ability to make that decision. There is one caveat. Last week we saw a significant increase of cases in one classroom, so we did a targeted mask mandate for that classroom in 5th grade to try and mitigate any potential spread, because we did start to see indications of spread within a specific classroom. So that is something new that we haven't done previously, is doing more of a targeted approach, because we weren't seeing any additional numbers outside of that specific environment. So we took a targeted approach, and I anticipate that that will be something that we might have to get more familiar with as we continue to evolve and address the needs of the student population. So we did do that targeted mask mandate. We did it for a temporary period of time, 14 days or 2 weeks, and until we get to the holidays, and I think that's in the best interest of student health. I have been fielding a lot of questions about why did we remove the mask mandate prior to potential vaccination being widely distributed and implemented. And we always went back to 2 factors driving our implementation of the mask mandate. 1, number of active cases locally, and 2, numbers of quarantine. Well, 3 weeks ago, the quarantine process changed, and students had the ability to mask and stay or test and play for extracurriculars, and that was instituted by ODH and the Licking County Health Department. So at that time, our numbers were relatively low. We had the new guidelines for quarantine, so we made the decision to pull back on the mask mandate at that time. People ask why not tie it to vaccination. We're not legally able to. This summer, House Bill 244 was passed, and it states that we cannot discriminate between vaccinated and unvaccinated populations. And so that I've been trying to get that message out that, you know, we really are looking at our local data and making decisions based on that. And I anticipate more targeted approaches moving forward. From an academic standpoint, we are seeing, you know, I think we did, for a lack of a better way of saying this, the pandemic well. Last year, we were able to offer an in-person and online option for parents, and it was a challenge. It was a significant challenge for our staff. That continues to be the case now, but we're seeing the kind of the fallout from, you know, not being fully in person, being masked, having different environments, and so staff are noticing students aren't where they're typically at.
And so they're trying to adjust their instruction. They're doing, formative assessments to see where students are at, and trying to accelerate their learning process. But that's going to take time. That's not something that you recover from quickly. We did a lot of intervention over the summer, but again, we're seeing the impact of some of that different learning experiences from last year. We also see a little bit more behavioral expectations not necessarily being followed. Students not being in a typical classroom experience for almost 2 years, especially at the lower levels, that can pose some challenges. So we're starting to see a little bit more of that, and we're addressing and working with parents, students, and our staff to address some of those things. We are heading into the indoor season, so to speak, so a lot more indoor activities. We have holidays coming up, so we're going to continue to look at our local numbers every single day. We track every single case, and we look for the nuances related to each case, whether we see a specific family with multiple family members driving the numbers, or one specific classroom that we have to pay attention to. I did send out an announcement to the K through 6 population today, notifying them that Lincoln County Health Department has identified 4 5 through 11 vaccine clinics that will be conducted throughout the county and made available to students and parents who so choose to get their students vaccinated. So that message went out today, but I know that Lincoln County Health Department is already doing walk-in clinics that are available to parents if they're interested. Shifting gears a little bit, we are experiencing significant personnel shortages. We have John referenced food service where he's experiencing having less employees that provide the service. We're seeing that in bus drivers. We're seeing that in substitutes. There are 2 action items on the agenda today that are related to the sub issue. We are struggling to compete with the private sector, who is able to offer a little bit more money than we are, and we see more people taking other jobs that aren't in the public education realm. So we're going to make some changes to our hiring process and the pay rate. We hope that that will have the impact that we're desiring, because we do have a lot of staff members covering classrooms for staff that are sick. And when you're in a classroom environment at the elementary level, we have 750 kids in our elementary that are under the age of 10. So think back to your parent days when it was tough to track 2 or 3, maybe 5 if you're a Thomas. That's a lot of students to really, manage and take care of and educate well. And with staffing shortages, with lack of subs, it's stressing the system. And so we're trying to find ways to get more people attracted to the environment. We're also looking at, do we have to, we've always had strong parent volunteers. With COVID, we've limited some of that. We're reassessing that. So we're going through that process of, what can we do safely, what can we do financially to ease the burden and the workload on our staff. Typically we see the level of exhaustion towards, the springtime. It's the highest I've ever seen it, quite honestly, this early in the year. So we're trying to take advantage of some of these opportunities for flexibility that we advocated for at the General Assembly. So this substitute teacher flexibility is something that we advocated for. We got inserted into bill language and passed with an emergency clause. There is also a bill that was dropped last week that was related to the 3rd grade guarantee. Again, at the elementary level, teachers are always trying to get students to certain benchmarks and levels, but there's always this kind of looming benchmark of making sure that they meet the 3rd grade reading guarantee. And we might have students that take a little bit longer to recover from the last year and a half of the pandemic. So we've advocated for a waiver of the third grade guarantee for at least 2 years. That bill was introduced, and it will go through the House and Senate primary and secondary education committees with Representative Gail Manning and Senator Andrew Brenner, who we talked with last week specifically at the Alliance Luncheon. So that is moving, but I do think if there's anyone out there that wants to work and you like kids and you can pass a background check and you have the ability to impact the schools positively, we'd encourage you to contact Tanya Sherburne, who is our HR director, and get involved. On a positive note, we did get 8 new subs last week. So Tanya interviewed all of them on last Friday, and many of them are on the agenda, so that's a positive. Other positives, okay? It's not all COVID and you know, clouds and doom and gloom. There are some really good things happening. Obviously, Mr. Durst was here to talk about the National Blue Ribbon Award. Last week, we hosted a virtual land lab visit for schools across the country that were interested in looking at what we have as a land lab. And more importantly, we involved our students from the AP Environmental Science in the field reports that took place in the land lab. So they were zooming in to school districts across the country and reporting about their take action projects that are occurring out in the land lab or in the school garden that Chef John referenced as far as the food that we received. Our students were absolutely amazing. Dr. Corman was there, she was present. She heard Brent Sodergren from US Fish and Wildlife, Jim Redding, our AP Environmental Science teacher, but our students were absolutely stunning.
They were fantastic.
Yeah. So you can elaborate later, if you would like. We had our band concert on Saturday night. It was a fantastic opportunity to highlight what I believe is one of the best bands in the state, maybe in the country. Mr. Smith and Mr. Crum do a fantastic job with all the parent volunteers putting together a fantastic show. They did a great job. Our football team is still undefeated. It's the furthest that they've traveled in postseason play in program history. It was a nail biter at Hamilton Township, but it was fun to watch. And our girls cross country team again placed second in the Division II cross country track meet. They were runners up. That program is just historically strong. We always hear from James Prentice that talks about our cross country program. He's a community member that participated in cross country long ago, and he comes back and talks about the tradition of cross country. Our girls continue to shine brightly. Our boys and girls soccer team both were district runner-up, so very strong postseason play. We have had our fall play that took place, I'm getting lost, maybe 2 weeks ago or a week ago. And so a lot of positive things are occurring. It's unfortunate because one of the things that we rely on is parents being able to come in and see a lot of these things firsthand. And you know, with the COVID protocols, we are still just not there yet, but I hope we're getting there. And so I would end with, you know, a lot of people say, when can we stop doing these things? And the answer is when the state of Ohio, specifically the Ohio Department of Health, makes the decision to move it from a Class A to a Class B virus. Class B viruses are things like the flu, pertussis, strep, where we have to just notify people to be aware that it's in the environment, but it's not, we aren't required to contact trace or quarantine or you know, work with the health department to make those decisions. So Class A we do, and we're still there, we're still in that environment, but Dr. Vanderhoff has said we're moving closer to that moment. And I just hope that it happens sooner rather than later, and we can continue to try and provide the best education possible, potentially provide some relief for our staff, and head into the spring in a very strong position. So that concludes my COVID update. Any questions? It's not a COVID update, it's a school update. Okay, want to clarify that.
Any questions or comments for Jeff?
There's a lot in there. So thanks for all that, because there's a lot going on, right? And you kind of highlighted two things relative to our decisions on masking and so forth, local numbers and quarantine. You alluded to kind of a third one I think was equally big, which is really kind of where is the spread, right? And what is causing it. And I'm not sure everybody knows how much work goes into that. And if I said that there were, daily discussions and communications with the health department, that would not be as many as we actually have.
Correct.
Right, and when we think about each individual case, we really drill down to exactly where did it come from. We have the seating charts, we have the positions of the kids, and we look into every one of those in detail. And it's an enormous amount of time for our administration, our staff members and our teachers have to track all that. And the coordination efforts, and our school nurses do a phenomenal job in terms of being able to pull this all together. So it's been an enormous amount of work across the whole organization. That's so important to make these decisions, right? Because it's really not just like what's happening in the county. It's not even what happens in some other case, right? It comes down to a classroom level, right? So I applaud your efforts recently to institute a mask mandate in a classroom when that was necessary. But it's a lot of time all across the board, but really very well spent. And it's time kind of taken away from the other stuff, right? And it's frustrating for our students to have to do this. It's frustrating for our staff and our administration. We all just want to get sort of back to normal. And, as we do get back to whatever that normal is, I think we've learned a lot, though, right? About how to take care of ourselves, and what the impact of vaccines are, and how masking can help, and when masking can help, and so forth. So I think there's a lot of great lessons we will have learned out of this, but they've sort of been painful in the process in many ways. But as I look around right now to reflect on a few of the real positive things, I've gone to a bunch of football games and really enjoyed this fall season. And I've talked to a lot of parents of our opposing teams. They're like, man, you guys have a great football team. And how about that band? Right? And then they hear about our academics, and they're like, what do you guys have in the water there? You're doing something right. And I think we really are. In spite of all this, we're doing fantastic. We really are. And again, I heard comments about the students at the Land Lab, and this was not just a little presentation. This was like some of the top school districts across the entire country, right? And they were, reasonably floored with the performance of our students and the kind of experiences that we're able to offer. And that just feels so good when I hear that kind of feedback from, independent outside sources and things like that. So, I know we'll keep that up. But it's a lot of hard work. So thanks to you and thanks to all in the school district here to making that happen for the kids.
I have a question about the academic differences that you referenced.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something new to our district in terms of, obviously, kids are individuals, but is there more of a spread that we're seeing? And maybe this is a question for the end of next year, the end of the school year, and maybe it's more of a question for Mr. Bernath, but I'm thinking about, does it feel very different in classrooms in terms of teachers working with kids that are at a very different range of levels because of COVID?
I think we can unequivocally say yes. It is different than previous years.
But
we always have stretch. We always have a range. We do a very good job in the development of class lists with teachers and the administration really trying to narrow the range. So to best influence the teacher's ability to meet students' needs. And I just think that we're seeing students that are coming in with a little less experience than they've had in the past. And so there's a little bit more recovery that needs to be done. But recovery means, solid exposure to what we call Tier 1, which is a regular classroom. And getting that exposure in more of an acceleration versus a remediation perspective.
Yeah, and does that feel like a new or a different kind of an environment for Granville per se? Or like if you went to a different district, would you generally on any given year have that range?
Yeah, I think.
Have more of that range than you generally do in Granville, would you say?
We tend to have students that come pretty well prepared and having a lot of experiences. And so, yeah, it's probably different from what we experience typically, but probably more common in other environments. And so, but our teachers do a great job. We've always prided ourselves on taking students where they're at and growing them. And, you know, we look at metrics such as progress, value added, and other measures that look at our growth throughout a year. And we typically experience above typical growth, which is excellent. And we did last year, but again, you know, last year was a little different. And so we're starting to see some of the nuances. The fact that we see them is a testament to how we focus on every individual child. It would be very easy to just say, you know, it's typical. It's not. We pay attention to each child and say, okay, how are they progressing in what we've identified as a typical trajectory.
And so it sounds a little bit as well in terms of the third grade guarantee that we are making sure as a district that we're continuing to expect a year's growth. And of course, some kids make more than that, but the expectation is that kids are making that year's worth of growth no matter where they're starting.
Right.
So there's not necessarily any kind of added pressure for teachers that, of course you want the kids to meet that third grade reading guarantee, but if the state is easing back on those restrictions, those levels a little bit, then teachers are expected for students to make that year's growth, not anything beyond.
Well, yeah, and it might be, we use the term not yet. I mean, they might not meet the benchmark yet.
Right.
So, you know, every child is different. And so what we try and do is, you know, work with each child to put them on a path for success, but not necessarily worry about the time it takes to get them there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, obviously, we're very good at following those benchmarks and getting kids to benchmarks and then passage on state assessments and all those types of things. But this might require us to take a little bit more time.
Yeah, and I mean, do you think also, from what I hear in my house, and what I see in other districts, do you feel that, I heard you say that there's exhaustion, so I assume you mean from staff?
Yes.
Okay, because from what I'm hearing, are you feeling that kids are still having that love of learning at Granville, and teachers are still fostering that?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. I mean, our staff is phenomenal. They really are. It's a little hard. It's hard. It's still not a natural environment where, you know, we look at the portrait of a graduate and we get kids in collaborative groups and we get them interacting. We have team-based centers and all these other things that are typical that we're still not necessarily hitting on all cylinders. At the elementary level, small group instruction is absolutely critical, and it's still a little hard to do that the way that we're used to doing that when students aren't able to potentially read facial cues and all the other things that go into the learning process. So our teachers are bending over backwards to try and make what's still atypical typical. That's kind of the best way I could describe it.
I guess what I've seen in my small handful of kids and the kids that I've seen and talked to is this, have a lot of confidence in us doing the things academically to address the range and bring all kids to where they need to be, you know, within a timing that's appropriate. But there's a lot of other stuff going on right now, right? And I think that, you know, although we've managed that process of asynchronous development academically extremely well, and we are built for that, all the other stuff that's being thrown our way, right? And social emotional questions, issues, behavioral problems at all ages, right? The stresses that are placed on adults in our community that their kids are feeling, and the kids are feeling that they put on adults in this community. It's like all of us are going through things that are very different than just the asynchronous academic development. And I think that's a hard one to forecast. It's new stuff to learn about. We're having problems, with second graders that maybe we used to only have with kindergartners. We're having problems with high schoolers that we used to only have with kindergartners. Right? We're having problems with adults, that we used to only have with kindergartners. and so I think we, because of the constraints that we've had in communicating, right, as a society, have had a lot of challenges, right? And I think those are the tough things for us to kind of work our way through as the community and the school district and stuff like that. But again, when I see some of the results happening and when I see the great stuff at the high school, when we come together around something, it works really well, right? And we don't quite know what to come together around, right? But when you have a focus and things like that, this community just really steps up to it, right? And it's the parents working in coordination with the teachers and the administration guiding things in the right direction. But we got to find a way to all come together around those goals again. Right, and I think the kids are a little disengaged in those goals, and that's why we have some issues, right? But I think if we use as our North Star, our mission, and our part to the graduate, right, and we have to really focus on, that's what we're about, I think we'll get back there, right? I think I would much rather have had my kids here, and will continue to want to have my kids here, given that we have that capacity, and we have that proven track record of long-term, that's what we're all about in Granville. But it's a messy process. It's messy these days, right?
No, absolutely, yeah. Nothing is as we want to do it. We don't know if it's even going to go back to how we want to do it. So, we have to adapt, resilience, adaptability. And I think we've done, an amazing job at doing that and helping our kids through it. Just look at all the things that Mr. Brown highlighted in terms of the successes of what our kids are able to do because of, all the hard work that gets done behind the scenes that a lot of people don't actually get to see. And so, all that work is really important as well, and I think it enables us to continue to be a really successful school district.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Ms. Brown? Or, okay, so we have come to the portion of our agenda where we will entertain public comment. If you would like to address the board, please approach the podium, state your name and address, and you can speak for up to 5 minutes. Would anybody like to address the board at this time? No? Okay. We will move on to board discussion. We just proceed, went through the 5-year forecast. If anybody has any additional questions or comments about the assumptions or the forecast going forward. One thing I wanted to note is that when we think about expenditures, there's those that we can control and those that we can't. Because if you think about that last bar in 2026, where we're outspending our revenues, a portion of that, and I don't know how much, we can comment on that, are expenses that we can't control. Chicken went from $40 a whatever unit to $90, and those are just things that we can't control. So I think it's, and we do, I think, a very good job of keeping control over what we are able to control.
Yeah, in terms of controllable, and 80% of our budget being staffing, that's really hard, right? And when you especially get out to, losing, where 18% of your revenue drops off,
yeah,
you would have to get into staffing at that point. So there's uncontrollable things like what our benefits look like. We can make changes during negotiations and things like that, but once you're in the middle of a contract or in the middle of the year, there are a lot of things, 80% of them are out of your control. So yeah, there are assumptions that go into it, but a lot of it is out of control, especially once you're mid-year.
I'd like to comment real quick. Several of us had a chance to attend the Ohio School Boards Association meeting this past week, which is an annual meeting of school board members, superintendents and treasurers, administrations of districts all across the state. It's a great experience with really good educational sessions, really good way to get introduced to board members from other districts. And lot of what I heard was like, these are not sort of uncommon problems. They're happening in a lot of places across our state, and I feel really good about the way we're addressing them. I also feel really good that, you know, as I kind of walked around there and people thought, oh, you're from Granville, right? We have a kind of reputation of being really involved, right? Because we've intentionally had a strategy of making sure we're involved at the state level, right? And oftentimes the loudest voices at the state level are the school districts that have the biggest problems, right? Whether it be financially or academically and so forth, they get a lot of traction. Granville's not really in that situation, but it gives us a little bit of a different platform to work from, right? And I'm grateful the latitude we've been able to provide our administrators in advocating for our students through things like the third grade guarantee, through strong advocacy for things like, you know, alternate rules for substitute teachers so we can have actual adults in the classroom with our teachers on a regular basis. And I wanted to give a quick shout out to our superintendent, Mr. Jeff Brown, who's the chairman of the Alliance for High Quality Education, which is an organization involving hundreds or more school districts across the country with a very similar focus that's got a very strong voice in advocacy that can help with us understanding as well as moving forward the financial conversations as well as all the academic things that seem to be continuously in motion at the state level and in need of our oversight. So thanks for your continued work there. It feels good when I attend a statewide organization like that, and they really recognize that what we've done is more than just for our own kids, but for the whole state. So, thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Moving on to the action agenda.
Okay, action item 10.01 is the approval of the 2022-2023 school calendar.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so as you know, the calendar is developed jointly through a committee process that is part of the collective bargaining agreement. But ultimately, one of the main requirements that is a part of that process is we have to align with CTEC, because CTEC is a school that we all send, Licking County, all of the high schools and school districts send our kids to. So we try and align them so people aren't having to transport kids, 2 weeks prior to or after the start of the school year. So the calendar reflects that alignment and the committee work, and so it's my pleasure to recommend that calendar.
I didn't see a copy of it in the notes or the things and so forth, but I assume, can you give us any highlights of anything that's significantly different? It's similar to past years. We graduate before Memorial Day.
Yes,
we have
correct.
Before
Well,
we start.
Graduation is the same time. It's the week of Memorial Day, and we are starting August 17th, and the teachers have 4 days prior to that where we do professional development. Our winter break is split slightly, so students come in Monday through Wednesday, and we'll have finals that week, which is good because then once they leave, they're kind of done with taking their finals, and then we'll come back, I believe, the 3rd or 4th. Mr. Burnett is giving me the number 4. So sometimes it works out that we have 2 full weeks, like Monday through Friday, but this was one of those years that is split, but it's still 2 full weeks off. So that's what most people want.
And in some past years, we have had days off sprinkled through the fall and spring. Is that continuing to roughly the same level as it was previously?
Correct, yes. Okay. So it's a very consistent calendar to what we have currently, with some slight exceptions.
Any other questions or comments? All right, take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Dr. Foreman?
Aye.
Thank you. Action item 10.02 is the approval of the statement of district compliance with nutritional standards.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, as Chef John and Tanya alluded to, we have to make a statement that we are in compliance with the nutritional standards in order to continue to qualify for federal programming. So that is, you are making that formal motion.
Not only are we in compliance, we are far above.
Yes.
Right? If you actually look at what compliance is, I'm a little saddened and embarrassed by how low the standards could be, but I'm super proud of how far we shoot above them, right? I mean, the quality of the food and the participation that we have is exemplary as always. Thank you, John.
My kids no longer eat the food I make them for lunch.
That is,
So it's a time saver.
yes.
Absolutely. They don't want their lunch. They don't want, yep, works well.
Any other questions or comments? Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Dr. Foreman?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Action item 10.03 is an increase in the substitute pay rate for substitute teachers.
So moved.
Second.
So if you remember back 4 years ago, we were at $90 a day, then we increased to 100, and now we're bumping up to 120. We are probably in the mid-range within school districts in Lincoln County at this point. Some closer to Franklin County have gone as high as $150 a day, and but they're also competing with Franklin County rates, which tend to be 10 to 15% higher. So we hope that this will have an impact on our ability to get more people in the pool. We currently have 67 subs in our sub pool.
Great opportunity for parents to participate in the educational process, right, at whatever grade level you feel comfortable with. And hopefully this financial incentive helps that sub-pool choose Granville. And hopefully we can continue to support them.
Yes.
But how many, like, so we have 67, but they're in multiple sub-pools across
Right.
the county?
Potentially, yes.
Potentially, so.
Yeah.
Any idea how much overlap?
There's some. It's not significant. A lot of people like coming to Granville, so they stay in our sub pool.
How many subs might we have on an average day?
We tend to have lower utilization Tuesday through Thursday. Mondays and Fridays, it can be as high as 45 staff members out, which is roughly 25% of our staff.
Any other questions or comments?
Well, more subs will definitely help out, staff that is covering. So that would, it would be great, just get as many as possible.
Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Dr. Foreman?
Aye.
Thank you. Action item 10.04, approval of the board resolution regarding Senate Bill 1 and substitute teachers.
Second.
So this is a resolution that we have to pass in order to comply with Senate Bill 1 that was recently passed, which we advocated for, which slightly reduces the qualifications necessary for a sub-license. And we still go through our typical hiring process, still go through, they have to secure a sub-permit and also go through the FBI and BCI process, and Tanya manages that process, but hopefully this gives us the ability to get more people into our sub-pool.
Any questions or comments? No? Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Dr. Foreman?
Aye.
Thank you. That takes us to our consent agenda, 11.01A through D.
So moved.
Second.
So I want to call your attention to a couple of things. One, we have listed the Granville Education Foundation grants, so we're approving those donations. You can see the different types of projects that were supported. The Granville Education Foundation does a fantastic job of supporting teacher-initiated grants, and I know that these are going to be very well received and utilized by our students, and we appreciate the teachers going through that grant process and creating opportunities for our students to benefit. It is typically the time where we do winter supplementals for extracurricular activities, and we have a recognition or a resignation with appreciation of service for Linda Thatcher, and then we have a couple of field trips that are, or at least one field trip that's identified for our Blue Notes.
Do you know what the Space Podcast Productions is? That sounds really cool.
Yeah. So that's something that the elementary school is having students create podcasts. So it's the actual podcast equipment so that they can have a high quality podcast as a final product for something that they're either researching or doing in their classroom. But it's actually elementary students.
Would you let us know where to tune into that channel?
Yes.
I wanna listen to that.
Yeah.
That sounds really cool.
It does sound cool. I'm looking forward to hearing some of them. We'll see if they come across Spotify.
Any other questions or comments about the consent agenda? All right, take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Deeds? Aye. Dr. Foreman?
Aye.
Item 12.01, approval of the October 2021 financial report.
So moved.
Second.
So we did not do a separate presentation this month and really just lumped it in with the forecast. The only item of note was the income tax payments. We receive income tax payments quarterly. And so that was included in our assumption for forecast. Any other questions on the financial report? And you have the printed copy in your folder.
And that's available online.
And that will be online.
Right, that's it.
Yep.
Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Deeds? Aye. Dr. Foreman?
Aye.
Item 12.02, approval to adopt the 5-year forecast statement.
So moved.
Second.
Any additional questions on the forecast?
Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Deeds? Aye. Dr. Foreman?
Aye.
Item 12.03, approval of request for extension for financial reporting deadline.
So moved.
Second. So we are requesting, well, I'm requesting permission from the board to potentially request an extension from the Auditor of State's office for our financial reporting deadline. So that is due on November 29th. And we are just having some issues related to our software conversion and getting some reports that we only use once a year out of that. And we're working with our gap conversion team on that. And I spoke to them on Friday, and they actually said that they're having a lot of issues because all the districts across the state are going through conversions right now, which is creating a lot of extension requests. So this is not uncommon. And hopefully we can have things wrapped up tomorrow. We had some internet email issues this morning that added to some of that complication. So my fingers are crossed that we don't need this, but just wanted to have it approved tonight in case we do.
Questions or comments?
Implementing an entirely new accounting and management system for all of the finance of the school district is a huge project, and I'm so pleased with how well it's gone. You know, in this case, if it's to get it done right, if it takes a waiver, if you need a waiver for 30 days, that's totally fine. I think the value that we get out of the system and making it run properly is very worth it.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the work.
Yeah. All right, take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Dr. Foreman?
Aye. And at this point, we will entertain a motion for adjournment.
Second.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Dr. Foreman?
Aye. Meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh. You would